The ground slowly crushed its depths, and as I killed him, I saw your face.
Shh, it's the Film Flamers.
Hey guys, it's Chris. Hey everybody, I'm Robert, and we're the Film Flamers. And it is Pride Month, and we have, lots of gayness to talk about this month, but we really needed to cover one thing first.
Right, we had to get this out of the way, and because we're already going to cover, an early 20th century film about Frankenstein, we thought we would do a late 20th century film about Frankenstein to balance it all out.
That's right. And a little primer.
Yeah, exactly. So we're covering Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, which is a 1994 science fiction horror film directed by Kenneth Branagh, who also stars as Victor Frankenstein, with Robert De Niro portraying Frankenstein's monster called The Creation in this film, and co-stars Tom Hulce, Helena Bonham Carter, Ian Holm, John Cleese, Richard Briers, and Aidan Quinn. The film follows a medical student who creates new life in the form of a monster composed of various corpses' body parts.
The film was released just a week before Interview with the Vampire, see our deep dive, and was part of a rash of period horror films, which also included Bram Stoker's Dracula, see our deep dive, and Mary Riley, no deep dive as of yet.
Never heard of it.
Never. Really? It's the one where Julia Roberts plays Dr. Jekyll's maid.
What? I've never heard of it.
Oh, yeah, it's not good. This version is considered to be the most faithful adaptation of Mary Shelley's Romantic-era novel that kickstarted the popularity of the Gothic fiction genre, although liberties were taken with its plot and characters.
Okay, listeners. Life is life. Death is death. These things are real. They are absolute. This is Mary Shelley's Frankenstein.
No one need ever die. I will stop this. No, you can't achieve death. We won't know unless we try.
I warn you, what you are suggesting is not only illegal, it is immoral.
What's happened to you?
Yes, that's the combination.
It's alive.
Did you ever consider the consequences of your actions?
In 1794, Captain Walton leads a crew of men with a death wish, in poor winter fashion sense, on an expedition to find the north-northwest passage to the North Pole. Their ship predictably gets stuck in the ice. Just as the crew is contemplating which of each other they'll eat first, they hear an eerie noise, and a mysterious cloaked man emerges from the fog. He tells them to grab their weapons. Their lives depend on it. The sled dogs run toward the sound and promptly get murdered. The cloaked man introduces himself as Victor Frankenstein, played by Kenneth Branagh, and asks Walton, "Do you share my madness?" Because what's a better icebreaker than mutual psychosis? Victor then launches into a flashback that no one needed or asked for, and the captain, inexplicably, listens to him as he tells his life story while his crew tries to, survive. Anyway, back to the self-important story. Victor grows up in Geneva with his adopted sister Elizabeth, played by Helena Bonham Carter, which is totally innocent until you realize they have the sexual tension of a Victorian Telemundo. After his mother dies giving birth to his much younger brother, William, Victor swears on her fresh grave to conquer death. which honestly is a weird funeral goal. At university, and not looking a day younger than 35, Victor studies medicine under Professor Foreshadowing Waldman, played by John Cleese. A man whose warning not to reanimate corpses is tragically ignored. Waldman is then murdered by an anti-vaxxer, whose body Victor later uses to build a man, because when life hands you a corpse and a traumatic event, you build a monster. It's called coping. Look it up. We've all been there. Helena Bonham Carter certainly has. Victor spends months building his creature, neglecting Elizabeth, who is busy surviving a cholera outbreak and his equally disgusting emotional unavailability. When Victor finally animates his monster, played inexplicably by Robert De Niro, he's shocked that a 7-foot murder doll made from graveyard leftovers isn't a looker. He tries to kill it immediately because Victor is the kind of dad who'd abandon a kid for being ugly. The creature, having inherited none of Victor's charm but all of his abandonment issues, flees and lives in a barn like a Disney princess, learning to read and speak by watching a local family. He even helps them anonymously by plucking potatoes out of the frozen tundra of Who Gives a Fuckistan. But when he finally introduces himself, they, rightly, react like he's a walking syphilis outbreak and chase him out. Bitter and newly literate, he reads Victor's journal because, of course, Victor left a detailed confession lying around like a Victorian blog and vows revenge. Back in Geneva, Victor returns home to marry Elizabeth, the sister-turned-wife, a red flag parade, if there ever was one, only to find his little brother William has been murdered. Justine, the servant girl, is randomly blamed by the Muppety townsfolk for some reason and violently hanged. The creature finally confronts Victor and demands a corpse bride. We've all been there. Victor agrees, but bails when the creature demands Justine's corpse be used, apparently drawing the ethical line at some necrophilia. So, naturally, the creature murders Elizabeth, Victor's brand new sister wife, on their wedding night by ripping out her heart, tossing her face first into the glass-covered bedside table and setting her on fire. Again, we've all been there. Victor promptly reanimates Elizabeth using parts of Justine, creating a bride of Frankenstein who looks like a Tim Burton fever dream. But that Bonham's Carter hath ceased to be. The creature arrives and claims her as a mate, but Elizabeth, realizing she's a patchwork prom date, sets herself on fire. Honestly, same girl. Victor and the creature escape the flaming mansion, beginning a manhunt that ends in the Arctic. Finally, Victor dies of being tired. And the creature finds his corpse and cries, mourning the only family he ever had. Captain Walton prepares a funeral pyre, but the creature jumps into the flames, torching himself with his maker. Walton, after being hit over the head with metaphor after metaphor of the dangers of man's hubris, finally realizes this expedition was a bad idea and orders the ship to go home. Home to who the fuck cares a Stan.
The end.
That is exactly what Shelley actually wrote.
See, I fixed it.
Take that, Branagh.
Frankenstein. Damn it! I'm still trained from
You're
that
still
one movie.
Brooksian all over the place?
Frankenstein was released on November 4th, 1994, after premiering at the London Film Festival. It opened on more than 2,100 screens and brought in $11.2 million opening weekend, securing the number 2 spot at the box office, right behind Stargate.
Right.
Other films in the top 10 that weekend included Pulp Fiction, The River Wild, Forrest Gump. In the 18th week, the top 10. God, also like Anybody the Vampire was out around that time. Like, Jesus. Such a good time at the movies.
It was, except Forrest Gump will forever live in infamy as far as I'm concerned.
Great soundtrack.
It is. Frankenstein would see steep declines in ticket sales over the following weeks and found its way out of the top 10 and theaters by its third week in release. Ultimately, it would gross $112 million worldwide, emphasis on world, as most of that was not the U.S., against a budget of $45 million.
That's not bad.
It's not bad worldwide.
Frankenstein has a 42% on Rotten Tomatoes, yikes, with an audience score of 49, so they agree. The site's consensus reads, Mary Shelley's Frankenstein is ambitious and visually striking, but the overwrought tone and lack of scares make a tonally inconsistent experience. That's actually like spot on.
Yeah.
Audiences polled by CinemaScore give the film an average rate of B-. Wow, I'm surprised it's that high.
Same. Roger Ebert of the Chicago Sun-Times gave the film 2.5 stars out of 4, writing, I admired the scenes with De Niro as the creature so much I'm tempted to give Mary Shelley's Frankenstein a favorable verdict. But it's a near miss. The creature is on target, but the rest of the film is so frantic, so manic, it doesn't pause to be sure its effects are registered.
I feel like he just couldn't articulate the word Muppety.
Yeah, that's all it is, Roger.
Drink. Janet Maslin of the New York Times wrote, Branagh is in over his head. He displays neither the technical finesse to handle a big, visually ambitious film, nor the insight to develop a stirring new version of the story. Instead, this is a bland, no-fault Frankenstein for the 90s. Short on villainy, but loaded with tragically misunderstood. Even the creature, played by Robert De Niro, an aesthetically challenged loner with a father who rejected him, would make a dandy guest on any daytime television talk show.
What? Janet.
Maslin.
Original screenwriter Steph Lady, who sold the script to Francis Ford Coppola's American Zootrope, said the film was a shocking disappointment, a mishappen monster born of Kenneth Branagh's runaway ego. He took a poignant, thought-provoking tragedy and turned it into a heavy metal monster movie. The casting of Robert De Niro as the monster was beyond inexplicable. Frank Darabont, who did a second draft, called the film the best script I ever wrote and the worst movie I've ever seen. He elaborated, there's a weird doppelganger effect when I watch the movie. It's kind of like the movie I wrote, but not at all like the movie I wrote. It has no patience for subtlety. It has no patience for quiet moments. It has no patience, period. It's big and loud and blunt and rephrased by the director at every possible turn. Cumulatively, the effect was a totally different movie. I don't know why Branagh needed to make this big, loud film. The material was subtle. The Shelley's book was way out there in lots of ways, but it was also very subtle. I don't know why it had to be this operatic attempt at filmmaking. Shelley's book is not operatic. It whispers at you a lot. The movie was a bad one. That was my Waterloo. That's where I really got my ass kicked the most as a screenwriter. Branagh really took the brunt of the blame for the film, which was appropriate. That movie was his vision entirely. If you love that movie, you can throw all of your roses at Ken Branagh's feet. If you hated it, throw your spears there too, because that was his movie.
Here.
Yeah.
Well said, actually. Mm-hmm. I've got some favorite reviews.
Okay.
My favorite from the media starts with Entertainment Weekly and says, Branagh directs like he's afraid the camera might fall asleep.
Oh my God, it's always whirling and twirling toward freedom.
And then, of course, the top 3 Letterboxd reviews. Every line is shouted. Every shot, the camera is spinning in circles around the actors. Ken, dude, you gotta chill out.
Yes.
Number 2, this movie is a constant state of almost becoming a musical.
It really fucking is, though.
I even said that when we were watching it. I was like,
Yes.
if they start breaking out in song, I'm gonna turn this off.
Well, there was one moment we were watching it and I was just like, had to bust into Les Mis for a minute, you know? So,
For real, it does sound like they're almost like on the verge of it, the entire fucking movie.
Yeah.
In every scene. Anyway, De Niro fucking murders John Cleese when he tries to give him a vaccine. What a truly timeless film.
De Niro, the anti-vaxxer. It does have some accolades, though. Well, near. At the Academy Awards, y'all, the Oscars. This movie was nominated for Best Makeup, but it lost to Ed Wood.
Oh, okay. That's interesting. At the BAFTAs, it was nominated for Best Production Design, although it lost to Interview with the Vampire. Here.
Yeah. And at the Saturn Awards, it was nominated for Best Horror Film, but it lost to Interview with the Vampire.
Here.
Best Actor, but lost to Martin Landau.
Here.
Best Supporting Actor, but lost to Gary Sinise. Best Actress, but it lost to a tie to Sandra Bullock and Jamie Lee Curtis. And Best Writing, but lost to Wolf.
Interesting.
Best Makeup, but it lost to Ed Wood. And Best Music, but it lost to Ed Wood.
I didn't know that Wolf I didn't know that Wolf won anything.
Just This. Maybe.
I've never wanted to see that movie ever again.
The Nicholson Pfeiffer Wolf. Yeah.
And Spader.
It's not, it's not good either.
Yeah.
For some reason, I get kind of lumped into this period movies. I think just because it came out around the same time, but it's really nothing like any of them. I don't know why people talk about it in the same breath, but here we are.
It's really over the top. Even for, its time. If you think about the contemporary films, like Interview with the Vampire, Stargate, like all of its theatrical peers, like none of them, even Interview with the Vampire, as theatrical as that is not like a fucking soap opera or even a straight up opera like this is.
Nope. This is a special period film.
Yeah.
I don't know. However, before we really get into the movie, I thought that this was a really good opportunity to talk about literature, because Mary Shelley's Frankenstein really cemented the Gothic literary subgenre and like made it super, super popular. And everything that happened after the release of this book really brought about the horror genre that we know today. Like, we would not have a podcast to speak on right now if it weren't for Gothic literature, right? And Frankenstein just really did it. So Frankenstein, or the Modern Prometheus, as its subtitle is, was first published in 1818 anonymously because, back then women were not allowed to write things such as Frankenstein, right?
Sure.
But Shelley's name first appeared on the second edition in 1821, and that was a French edition. So the French are very brave. So, but of course, and I'm sure that we've talked about this at some point in the podcast, there's a whole legend surrounding the writing of Frankenstein that everyone knows about, right? But the summer of 1816, also known as the year without a summer, because the weather was so horrible in Europe, Mary and her future husband, Percy Shelley, and their friend John Polidori went to go visit their friend Lord Byron in Switzerland. And during this visit, they could not go outside and frolic, so they developed this competition to see who could write the best like ghost or horror story, right? And Mary took a couple days and she wrote what she thought would just be the short story of Frankenstein, but her husband Percy encouraged her to continue the work. And then several years later, here's the novel, right? But Polidori's The Vampire also originated from this competition, and I'm sure we talked about that.
Oh.
Back in October when we were doing all things Dracula. It's really more important when it comes to Gothic fiction, right? So it began in the 18th century, but sort of found its popularity in the Romantic era of the 19th century and into the Victorian era, though a sense of realism was more in favor then. But people like flocked to these things. This is when we always talk about like Penny Dreadfuls and all these books that sort of have the same kind of structure, right? So
but it certainly wasn't considered a serious genre.
No, it was considered a moneymaker, right? But the Gothic fiction all had same characteristics. So they all deal with like supernatural events, although it can sometimes be a red herring if they wanted to bring in some realism. They all had settings that had old, dark places like castles, churches, etc. The past always plays a role in this. Like, it's coming back to haunt the present. Fear is very important. Murder happens a lot, crime or imprisonment. There's an unreliable structure and narrator in almost all these things. And they relied heavily on metaphors. They were trying to say something by putting all these horrific things in there.
Sure.
So there's several types of Gothic that became very important. And one is female Gothic, right? So primary readers for Gothic fiction were women, just like women are big proponents of horror today. But they were expected to feign embarrassment due to reading these things because it was the Victorian period. So they would read something that would be untoward and they'd have to blush and put the book down. But these female authors began to incorporate all these Gothic characteristics into their work, bringing female protagonists into it in an effort to bring some equality to the sexes. So for the first time, females were able to discuss like societal pressures and their sexual desires. People like Jane Austen, who wrote Northanger Abbey, Charlotte Bronte, who wrote Jane Eyre, and Emily Bronte, who wrote Wuthering Heights, were all like really important. Mm-hmm. But as the Victorian era kind of grew, people wanted to talk more about their own lives, right? So metaphors became very heavy, and it moved from like the moors and castles of England to the city. And these urban Gothic novels use their structure to talk about urban decay, social anxieties, questionable ethics, things like that. And this really served as a path toward modernism.
So would you say that it really got away from like the Gothic romance of it all and just went Gothic?
Yes. So, I mean, this is where we started to see things become actual horror, right?
Yeah.
And, you know, people would stop using the term Gothic after a while, although it is still part of a thing, right?
Yeah.
But this is where we would see things like Bram Stoker and The Picture of Dorian Gray. And
But the buildings have to be older than the characters.
Exactly.
In Gothic.
They do.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, like the dark, scary place never really went away, right?
Yeah.
Things were happening in America too for this. Like Edgar Allan Poe, obviously, is like the king of everything Gothic. Nathaniel Hawthorne, Edith Wharton, Washington Irving with Sleepy Hollow. And we still see it today, you know, but we would call this horror, right? Instead of Gothic. But people like Tennessee Williams and Anne Rice would be like a Southern Gothic. Shirley Jackson, of course. Joyce Carol Oates with her mountains of work is all Gothic. Stephen King, Neil Gaiman, Clive Barker, like they all contribute to sort of this Gothic structure and all of this kinds of literature and Frankenstein in general.
Would you say that's like a neo-Gothic when you get to things like, I can definitely see Anne Rice kind of being a bridge there. No matter where she is in time, like I'm saying like a genre bridge versus like Stephen King, I almost feel like he's more of like a neo-Gothic, if Gothic at all, because I think of his work as very contemporary as part of his, like even his setting, right?
It is, because he will still use places that are kind of large and grand and dark. Think The Shining, right?
Okay, yeah.
But he has a very contemporary sense when it comes to his Gothic writing. I think that you would see a lot more of the Gothic tendencies and Gothic structure in some of his works that are far less horrific, right?
Yeah.
But
whereas like I'm saying like Anne Rice is gonna, you know, go off about like the decay of New Orleans versus Stephen King's more to talk about like dad's struggle with addiction.
right,
You know what I mean?
the decay of mankind.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anne Rice is a truly, truly Gothic writer, like in every sense of the word. And like her novels are, well, I've really only read 2, but I like them a lot. And they're certainly like Gothic to the core, right? I love the structure of Gothic literature. I think it's super important. And I think that when you're talking about like literary structures, it's the one that's the most on point every time. You know when you're reading something that's Gothic.
Like many authors, I feel like their work, the quality of their work can be like a bell curve. You know what I mean? And for Anne Rice, that's certainly true. I feel like her mid to late career is some of her best work.
And Mary Shelley didn't have like an illustrious writing career.
Not at all.
You know, but she didn't need to, because this book became incredibly popular.
She wrote another genre book, at least, right?
I think so. I can't remember the name of it because everyone reads this one. Yeah. But I feel like most people have read Frankenstein at some point by the time they make it to high school or out of it. And like everyone knows it. And every time that I'm reminded of what Shelley did, like she sort of helped create a subgenre and she really helped cement like what we would call horror today. And I think that's truly important. I'll get off my literary soapbox now.
No, please kind of have a half step on it, because we're going to continue talking about this film, which is of course steeped in the literature, at least a little bit, or tries to be.
Yeah.
Or maybe it tried not to be. I don't know. I feel like we do have a cast. I don't like Kenneth Branagh. I generally just don't like him and stuff.
Just say it out loud.
And he's a director. He makes he's a competent director, and he's a competent actor for sure, of a certain ilk. And he casts himself. Right. And if you don't know who he is, maybe something more streamlined, like Gilderoy Lockhart from the second or third Harry Potter movie.
Right.
Right. And where he kind of plays a douche that's faking everything. But I mean, like, to me, that's him.
Yeah, I don't think it was much of a stretch for his acting in that.
But he's very Shakespearean. He just tries to like bring that to pop culture and everything. And so he's done some good work in that sense. Right. But I don't know everything about like everything I've seen him do or have done has like a weird self-importance to it that I don't really jive with.
I feel like he is like a quintessential like self-important director, right? Because when we know this, because he always casts himself. You are correct.
It feels like he's trying to be like the next Olivier, right? Or like the director of that or something. And he's like, well, I'm going to bring art to the cinema, you know, and it's up to me to bring theater to the cinema.
And I wonder how many people are standing behind him, like making the jerk off motion with their hand, you know? And so
I'm one of them.
Yeah, and same sometimes. I really like Shakespeare, and I think that he does Shakespeare well. I think that
Because what he's really doing is like giving us Shakespearean Telemundo for the cinema.
for real. I mean, I think that Kenneth Branagh has made like one of my favorite and one of my least favorite Shakespearean adaptations, and so he tries to bring something to the table whenever he adapts, but sometimes his best work is when he doesn't need to go crazy fucking with it. Like, just use the source material. That's fine.
Yep.
But I really don't like a director that feels the need to put themselves in a starring role every single time they film something.
And a really, really flashy one at that. I feel like Mel Gibson kind of Kenneth Branagh himself a little bit with like Braveheart, but he's not really been in a lot of these other ones, right?
No.
Right? It's like Apocalypto. He did not, of course, make an appearance. It wouldn't make sense for him to. But anyway, this is a big cast. We can get off the Kenneth Branagh like hate machine because I don't hate him. I think, like I said, I think he's competent. And I think he does some good work and important work, and he's done amazing work. But for the most part, I just don't get the good vibes from him, and that's a personal, subjective opinion.
He's just a little pretentious.
Yeah, but without like, it's like you can be pretentious, but you have to follow through on it. You have to give me something that makes me feel pretentious to understand it.
Oh, okay.
You're right?
Yeah.
Like, all of this stuff, like fucking Green Knight or something, something like layered, but this is just all up there on the surface. There is,
Oh, this for sure. And this wasn't even like the first film that he directed,
This is smart as the potatoes that Robert De Niro has the fish out of the frozen earth. But anyway, this is a stack cast. Has Helena Bonham Carter.
Yes.
And Ian Holm, the late great Ian Holm, as well as Robert De Niro, inexplicably. Tom Hulce, who was delightful as always.
Yeah.
Who played Amadeus?
Tom Hulce.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and it was around this time.
Yeah, well, that was the 80s.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah.
I was like, he's gained a little of weight here, but he's still playing a graduate student,
He doesn't, Tom Hulce didn't really age until like much later in his life.
Yeah.
He kind of looked the same all throughout the 80s and early 90s. So,
well, as most of us, I didn't. John Cleese, who I didn't even was like, he reminds me of John Cleese. He's as tall as John Cleese, and the way he talks is kind of John Cleese. But John Cleese is always so comedic. John Cleese plays John Cleese. When John Cleese is in Harry Potter, for instance, with the rest of all of British
cast,
with the rest of this cast, literally, except for Ian Holm, he's always John Cleese. Like, he is who he is. He is his characters in Monty Python and in Will and Grace and in Harry Potter. I have never seen him play such a straight role where he's kind of like just sullen, with kind of macabre and over serious.
Yeah, he's very mysterious.
And it really gave him like a chance to show that he can be kind of different. And so much so, like, and he has a full beard and long ass hair and completely different physical style. I literally did not recognize him.
There are some times in this film where he doesn't even sound like John Cleese.
Yeah.
I feel like he was trying to not sound like himself, but then he sort of slipped into it from time to time.
Comedic British thing going on. And this is like, I don't raise the dead. So he's completely doing everything. He's acting. My God, he's acting.
But odd, though. I just assumed that you knew that was John Cleese. Like, when we were watching it. Otherwise, I would have exclaimed something, you know? But, like, okay.
What else did we say? We were like, that reminds me. I wish this was... Does that remind you of... Who else was that? And you were like, yes, I was just thinking that.
Oh, God. I can't remember now. It was... Oh, no.
It was the woman, the head woman. The head maid lady.
Jane Seymour.
I was like, that reminds me of Jane Seymour.
Yeah, that was it. Sure.
I wish that was Jane Seymour. Anyway, yeah, and then we got Aidan Quinn, who's been in a shit ton of stuff.
Yeah.
As the captain, in the bookend story. But yeah, quite the cast. I think Kenneth Branagh, just like everyone wants to like people that hadn't had a piece of the Shakespearean pie. Kenneth Branagh was like opening up all kinds of cinema for these people to do in the 80s and 90s.
And that's true, and the thing is that like some of these actors have already been in like, some Merchant Ivory stuff that came before this.
Certainly Helena Bonham Carter.
Yeah.
All
God.
Yeah.
Every kind of period British drama. I mean, she was Room with a Viewing everywhere and Howard's Ending everywhere, So it makes sense for her to be in something like this. But for real, I mean, if Kenneth Branagh did nothing else, he really brought the literature to cinema, and I have to appreciate that. So,
Yeah.
Yeah.
So in this production, we already mentioned Steph Lady, who wrote the original script to the film that was actually sold to Francis Ford Coppola's American Zoetrope. And Coppola originally intended to direct the film, as he had, done Bram Stoker's Dracula 2 years before, to great success. But he instead elected to serve as executive producer. And, he may not have actually had like a peak passion about it, since it wasn't actually his idea to do Bram Stoker's to begin with, right? It was Winona Ryder's. She had gotten the script, and she was going to, she had to exit Godfather 3 for exhaustion or something. And she came back as an olive branch and be like, I have this beautiful script for Bram Stoker's Dracula. I want you to direct it. I want to star in it. I'm going to produce it. I'm going to help you do it. And he was like, great, sure, let's do it. Because he had an idea of how he wanted to do it. He wanted to do it in a way that celebrated early 20th century film, turn of the century film. And he did. Everything was in camera and all that. But I think that was what he was more interested in than the actual story of Dracula, right? So, it was actually Coppola who wanted Robert De Niro cast as the creature.
What?
Yes. Above all else, which resulted in his casting over considerations like Gerard Depardieu.
Gerard Depardieu?
And Andy Garcia. What a trio. So wait, weren't those two of those three were literally like Three Musketeers together?
Oh my God, Andy Garcia was on that?
I think so.
Was Robert De Niro in Three Musketeers?
No, but Gerard Depardieu was. He was the only French one.
He was the only French person in that movie.
With his potato nose.
Andy Garcia is so hot, though. That's a different conversation to have. But
Maybe I'm thinking of who was the guy in Hereditary? And End of Days with Schwarzenegger. Because I think that's the one. I don't think it's Andy Garcia. I don't know. Whatever.
Gabriel Byrne.
Gabriel Byrne is who I'm thinking of, not Andy Garcia.
Okay.
My bad. Anyway, we keep asking, why the fuck did Branagh cast De Niro? Well, it was actually literally the opposite. Because once American Zoetrope and Coppola said, hey, we set up the movie, we're going to make it, we've got the production, Robert De Niro is cast, we've signed on, it's moving, we cannot stop this train, but I'm not going to direct it. So Robert De Niro essentially was the decision maker, right? And so it was him that cast Branagh as the director.
Good God.
He picked the director. So it's like, I'm not sure which decision was worse. So it's just like completely opposite than I thought. De Niro literally handpicked Branagh to direct this.
And I can see where he made that choice. You know what I mean?
And now I understand the film more because Branagh did not have his own vision for this. He just he was like, what's this next Shakespearean project going to be? Oh, might as well be this because I'm being handed $100 million to make it or whatever.
He had already done Dead Again, and then he did Much Ado About Nothing to some sort of great Shakespearean success. Yeah. And then he was like, well, of course I should do Shelley. Thank you, De Niro. And thank you, De Niro, for this. I don't know.
Sure. So Branagh brought in Frank Darabont to write in a second draft of the screenplay, insisting on including elements from the novel that had not been present in the original script, complete with having as many, quote, explicitly sexual birth images, unquote, to go along with elements inspired from Mary Shelley's life in terms of her being surrounded by images of death. And I think that's weird. I feel like Mary Shelley's work should speak for itself. You're really kind of near, also I think it was fairly early in her life. Mm-hmm. She had a little bit of tragedy, I think, before then. And it might've been a lot, but like she after which she lost like 4 children and her husband. But all that is, I believe most of it, if not all of it, was after she wrote this book.
She wrote Frankenstein very, very early.
I mean, she had to flee a country so that she could underage marry someone. And that's where she was at Byron's, Yeah. But that wasn't really tragedy so much. It was irresponsibility.
I'm not really the kind of reader who takes a lot of the author's life into account of their work. You know what I mean? I'm more of a reader response kind of guy. But you're right. I mean, everything that like he's talking about here has nothing to do with the creation of Frankenstein.
Well, there's the theory, give someone a fucking breakup and they'll do their best work. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Like all the best like female albums, like Alanis Morissette and, 50,000 others do their best work after a fucking breakup.
And that's true, you know, but I don't feel like I need to like delve into the creator's psyche so much.
And then of course, Anne Rice, you know, her catharsis writing was Interview with the Vampire after her daughter died at 5 years old. That was Claudia, essentially.
And I think that's important information to know, you know, but I really don't use it when it comes to like analysis.
I don't want to. I'd rather know after.
Yeah.
It colors it as far as my understanding of like the structure and the reason behind it if I want to study a work for the work itself, but not within the narrative.
I would say for the movie that they're trying to make, like all these things that they're talking about, including, are not that important to a modern audience, right? They don't care. They may have read Frankenstein, you know, they've certainly heard of it, but they don't know anything about Mary Shelley.
No.
And so like it's just a wasted effort, really.
Yeah.
But okay.
But yeah, as opposed to the novel, the film includes like a recreated bride due to Branagh believing that it seemed to, quote, make psychological sense, unquote, while reflecting on his difference from James Whale and, you know, the staging for both his Frankenstein films that he stated as having, you know, high camp, which ironically.
Yeah. I mean, this movie has the highest amounts of camp. I don't know. So like, okay, listeners, originally we were going to do the Universal version of Frankenstein and then Bride of Frankenstein. And like, to me, this particular Frankenstein movie has so much more camp and so much more theatricality to it.
It's so staged like a musical. It just does feel like Branagh's like wanting to do Les Mis, you know, and
yes.
get a chance to do it or something.
He was just like dying to do a musical at that point, but he was just like, oh no, well, we just can't. We shan't make a musical version.
But he stated in an interview that the film was, quote, a family tragedy like Shakespeare. Of course. Yeah. And then he continued, quote, there are lots of echoes of Hamlet in it, I think. Victor Frankenstein is the opposite side of the coin as Hamlet. Instead of forming a philosophy of death and a journey toward it, he resists it. He says, let's stop them dying and see if we can do better. He replaces Hamlet's intellectual pursuit with physical action and still isn't happy. So, in effect, it's opposite.
Yeah.
Anyway, De Niro studied stroke victims in preparation for the voice of the creature.
It's rude. What? My God. That seems like something that should be saved for
It's just a train wreck of bad decisions.
It really is.
But it makes sense, right? Like if you're like, hey, someone's brain was literally like taken out and then like shocked and then like put in this person's body and they're having to relearn everything. Like they're trying to say there's no mechanism of like this person has actually been resurrected. It's a new being.
Right.
Right. With some weird exception with the bride, which of course is Branagh's own invention based on Whale's invention.
Well, and they were also talking about like remembrance and things like that. So like the creation also says I remember certain things about my previous life. I mean, the thing is that like everything about the production of this movie,
he had muscle memory is what he was trying to say.
Okay. Yeah. Cause by then
you had glazed over.
Everything about the production of this movie and the way that it came about makes complete sense to me because Bram Stoker's Dracula was a successful film and people liked it and it was highly regarded critically. And so it would make sense to go to some other sort of period Gothic film to sort of recreate that.
Big sets, big actors, you know, lots of cool costuming, right? But they just didn't get to the heights of Bram Stoker's. Because I think Coppola just wasn't there and Kenneth wanted to do it himself.
Yeah.
I think there was definitely some set pieces and some costumery and some scenes that were certainly influenced, like the big red cape at the end when he's taking her body or whatever.
The difference is that
steps.
Bram Stoker's Dracula sort of begins nicely and Mary Shelley's Frankenstein begins with the title card flying at you from the back.
Oh my
You know
God,
what I mean?
Meryl Streep would break so many bones going down those stairs later on in the 90s. That staircase. This is one for the ages, man. That's like an Errol Flynn like disaster waiting to happen. Like
Victor, you pushed me down the stairs.
No rails on that shit.
No, I would fall
stories
down.
tall. Yeah.
I would look at it and just say, no, we're going somewhere else.
Just like super gothic.
And there really hasn't been a faithful adaptation of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein either. So
yeah, I'm getting that. Except for Penny Dreadful. I feel like Penny Dreadful gets close to the vibe.
It does, but they don't. It gets close to the vibe, but they just don't have enough room to tell the whole story because they're telling every other Gothic literature thing going on, you know, which is good. after this Victorian literature class that I'm in right now, like clearly listeners, I am. And watching this and other things, I really want to go back and watch Penny Dreadful again. So
Yeah.
let me do it.
I love it. But this is a big and lavish production. I mean, it does kind of, in moments, feel like a visual companion to Francis Ford Coppola's Bram Stoker's Dracula.
I mean, it does and it should. I mean, I wonder how much input Coppola had in some of this, or he was just like, you know.
He was certainly involved.
Yeah, I mean, because there was some money involved.
Certainly in the beginning and the end, you know, but the music here is by Patrick Doyle, and it to me, this feels like great value Elliot Goldenthal, who had done the far, far superior score to Interview with the Vampire that same year. In fact, there are several mini musical cues in here that sound extremely similar, which is really weird because they came out the same year. And I'm like, this wouldn't be Elliot Goldenthal's first rodeo of being copied. I'm looking at you, Tyler Bates, score for 300, which ripped off Titus. You know, but he's been ripped off before a couple of times, documented. This doesn't happen to anyone else. Like, people aren't ripping off like John Williams or like Jerry Goldsmith. They're ripping off Elliot Goldenthal for some reason.
Maybe he's just running around to every composer saying like, just give this a listen. Here's what I'm working on right now.
What? I think it was Kenneth Branagh's in through fucking Elliot Goldenthal's wife.
Who was that?
Oh, you don't know?
No.
She directed Titus.
Oh, Julie Taymor?
Yes.
Oh my goodness gracious.
The Taymor is the wife of Elliot Goldenthal. And you know the Taymor is making The Tempest and shit like that with Helen Mirren.
Well, and
all
Titus
kinds
is
of
also
shit.
fucking Shakespeare.
Yes.
So yeah.
you know her and Branagh are like budding.
Oh, God, you're right.
There was an end because I think they're besties. Patrick Doyle has basically made the music for every film that Branagh's ever done. In Henry V, Dead Again, Much Ado About Nothing, finally this film. And then after that, Hamlet, Love Labor's Lost, As You Like It, Sleuth, Thor, Cinderella, Murder on the Orient Express, All Is True, Artemis Fowl, Death on the Nile. Yeah.
I didn't know that Patrick Doyle did these many films because he also did Great Expectations, which I like that film quite a bit.
Better soundtrack than music score.
Oh God, the compilation soundtrack to that is amazing.
Yeah.
But Patrick Doyle, and also like Tori Amos helped him with some of that shit, so of course I like it. But that's like the only thing that I knew him from. I had no idea. He wasn't a name that I would know.
Because he's great value Elliot Goldenthal.
Exactly. And he's just cavorting around with Branagh.
Yep, exactly. Yeah. Should we get into the themes here? I think we've really kind of touched on it, but obviously this is about loss, or at least that's the catalyst, right?
Yeah.
Is this maybe the first example of like proto-grief horror?
I mean, honestly...
outside of Gothic, you know what I mean?
Well, I mean, I think that if we're talking about the themes of this movie, it would also be the themes of the novel, right? And so, like, yeah, there's a very definite sense of loss around.
Yeah, I'm talking about the novel. This is certainly not the first grief horror in film.
Oh, no. But no, I mean, I think in the novel, because everything that happens in this and all of Victor's stuff comes from the loss of his mother, right? Mm-hmm. And his wanting to stop death. And it's never about creating new life. It's always about stopping death, really. Yeah. And but and so one of the things that didn't get changed from the novel in this movie, I hate sometimes when people talk about like how close to the novel this is. And I was like, but just in comparison to the others, like it's really relative, not. Yeah, it's really not the book at all. There's so many things that are different in this.
Certainly the final, like the third or fourth act or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, so like Victor goes to create a bride, essentially a mate for Frankenstein in the novel, but he abandons the project and destroys it. And that's what, causes the creation to go back to Geneva to like kill Elizabeth. I mean, those things are in there. The thing that I like the most that they keep in this movie that they tend to not in other things is Justine, right? So, and then her framing.
It's almost like they increased the romance in both Bram Stoker's Dracula and Frankenstein to almost complement visually the Gothic pieces of it.
Yeah, well, and sort of like the Victorianness of it all, And I think that's true of a lot of Gothic work. I mean, because if you look at If you look at adaptations of like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, they add a love interest in there that wasn't even present in the novel. I mean, I think that's what modern viewers want to see. They need some kind of like love story to hold on to. But
yeah, and I just don't know that it's needed. If you're if you wanted to go for straight horror, right? You don't need that, but we know that today in hindsight, in 2025 eyes. But the reason I call it proto-grief horror is because it doesn't really therapize about the grief at all. It's just the catalyst for what everything else that happens. There is no retrospection other than like they never connect the end theme of hubris of man with his grief of why it was started to begin with.
This is true.
They never make that connection. I don't know if they do in the book. They probably do since it's a little bit more naturally cerebral.
Yeah, I think that when you're dealing with like man's hubris when it comes to Frankenstein, I think it has more to do with like a religious aspect to science, maybe,
Yeah. This is also tied with creation and abandonment, loneliness, isolation, nature versus nurture. All of that's kind of wrapped in there, obviously.
Yeah.
I was thinking about other stories, early stories about man's hubris in literature, and Oedipus Rex, 429 BC. Icarus and Daedalus. I thought that would have been earlier, but it's not. It's around the turn of the I guess, what do you call it? Between CE and BC? The time change, the great time change.
Around the birth of Christ.
Oh my God, we can't wind our clocks back. We have to get a whole new watch. Yeah. Faust from 1604, although that was like Dr. Faustus or something. And then this is, obviously Frankenstein is the granddaddy of scientific hubris and stories. Yeah. If you don't count, like Icarus with the mechanical wings or whatever. Although I think there was like wax. But then Moby Dick, right? 1851. Mm-hmm. But that's more like revenge. And that's also kind of grief.
It is, and there's an element of revenge in Frankenstein as well. So I mean, I feel like Moby Dick itself can be considered Gothic literature.
You've got more purely without the whole grief element in film, like Jurassic Park. This all came out of this guy's like wish to please, and fill his grandchildren with joy. At least in the film. And then The Fly, that's scientific hubris for sure, but it doesn't come from grief or needing to like impress anyone, right? Ex Machina, big time. 2001: A Space Odyssey, big time. Doctor Strangelove. And then, I can run off a lot of others. Blade Runner, The Prestige, which we still need to deep dive. I'm desperate to deep dive The Prestige at some point because you still haven't seen it.
I have not.
Event Horizon, Prometheus, obviously. Don't Look Up also comes to mind.
I think a lot of the things that these films have in common, aside from it being like scientific hubris, but a lot of these movies have to deal with creation as well, right? And even though they don't
playing God,
they don't touch on religion, probably, and I don't think the novel really does either.
Creating life with Jurassic Park and Ex Machina, and astral bodies, teleportation with The Fly, and playing God with that, and then 2001: A Space Odyssey and the creation of that intelligence and exploration and all of that. Yeah,
it's all about creation to me. Like every time I think about Frankenstein, I don't really think about the loss that Victor experiences, because you're right. It's all about. That's the reason that the action happens,
Yeah, and she was thinking of a ghost story. I'm wondering really if in her case, she really worked backwards from what she wanted to do to give him a catalyst for why he does it.
Yeah.
I don't think the story came out of his grief. I think it came out of what she wanted to write about.
No, I think you're correct. And I think that, all of it had to do with the creation of like a corpse person, a monster, right? And that's where the horror is. And then she went back and so talked about its creation and what that has to say.
Well, she was
about
also
man.
reading like scientific journals, I think, at the time, and articles about galvanism, which was a big thing that was coming, mostly to do with electricity and all that.
Well, and there's no doubt that like the time that she wrote this work, like scientific discoveries were happening like all over the place. I think that people don't really realize how much came out of the 19th century that we take for granted today, And so like all these things were kind of new and fascinating and scary.
Well, in Europe, the Age of Enlightenment was happening in the 1700s.
Yeah. And but like by the time that Shelley was writing, you
That
know,
was early 1800s, so that would have been on the heels of that. You know?
so we were having things like the steam engine and stuff like that.
We're talking about the time between the Age of Enlightenment and industrialization, which has got to have been like almost like the equivalent of today, you know, like in between, you know, the internet and AI, or, you know,
or like, I mean, the creation of a smartphone, you know, like the time that she was living in and writing in. So it would make sense to throw these scientific things in there. And I think that a lot of people were frightened of that.
And ironically, it feels like, you know, like also even in Bram Stoker's Dracula, like they're walking through like the museum in London, you know, and they're seeing, you know, the motion picture for the first time.
That's right.
And all those things.
It was all very frightening. And people, I mean, I don't know. I really love this time period.
Of course, I don't remember that scene was in the book. I don't think so. I don't think it was.
No, I think you just wanted to put it in there. There are things that you have to put into like film versions too, because I don't know. I mean, because there are some moments in this movie where some of his professors are talking about like religion and playing God, you know, and you're just here to heal the sick. Like, don't try to do something that you're not. Like, you are not God. And I mean, I guess there's parts of that in the novel.
That person has ceased to be, said John Cleese.
Let him alone. This is an ex-parrot. Wow, no. Themes. There are lots of themes in Frankenstein, but I don't know. This movie, though, really takes them and sort of beats you about the ear, nose, and throat with them.
And everything else.
That's right. And the camera. But we have some questions to ask about this movie. And of course, you're going to answer this. No, but is Frankenstein a horror movie?
Yes, I mean, sigh.
Yeah, I know.
Let's sigh.
I think I'm only going to ask this question if there's a remote possibility.
It's so muddy. It starts off like it wants to be a horror movie. Like, you remember they try and do a Dolby shock with a lightning strike.
Yeah.
After Mary Shelley's like voiced out, like it's almost like a cartoon.
Yeah.
For fuck's sake. And then it just goes into this like roller coaster of like a Muppety soap opera, Telemundo, near musical levels of over the topness.
And that is okay. You know, like I feel like movies that have like sort of like telenovela, like melodrama,
but it's
like,
not consistent.
But this is so melodramatic, so melodramatic. And it doesn't really know what it wants to be the most.
It's like, I must follow the monster randomly. And, oh, that means I'm going to be climbing this giant iceberg. And like there's a lot of character motivation in the film that's like dramatized visually that probably just wasn't on the page because of Branagh. And like those decisions just don't match what's actually like being said or like what's happening. And it just makes things so even more Muppety and weird and inexplicable.
And I don't know that this movie wants to be a horror movie. It is just because of its place in culture or whatever. But like the Rotten Tomatoes consensus is 100% true. It's lack of fucking scares. Like, this is not a scary movie, right? Were you scared while watching it?
No.
There's nothing frightening about this horror film at all.
There's some cool fucking shots though.
There are some cool shots that like are kind of awe-inspiring. Like, what was your favorite?
You know, two come to mind that I've thought of actually multiple times since I've watched this movie. And one is the internal camera of like, and it didn't have to show that, right? Like showing the inside of essentially the womb/tomb of these bodies as they're getting brought back to life. Yeah. They're not using lightning. They're using these electric eels. Right. And so the view of the body inside like the amniotic fluid, which is gross, but then you see all of the electric eels fly past. And I was like, that really looked good. Like, it's memorable. I've never seen quite anything photographed like that. Yeah. And that looked really good. But really the most is when Helena Bonham Carter sets herself on fire and then basically runs through the house and everything's lighting on fire with her as if it was just like already soaked in gasoline, which I'm sure it was. But it's so visually striking. Well, you know, I want to say the last act of this movie is very visually striking. Yeah. But it's also taken apart from like the first 2/3 of this film, which aren't as much. So it's really inconsistent in a lot of different ways.
No, I mean, I think
Like out of nowhere, we're going to add this like really theatrical dress that's 30 feet long randomly, you know, for the staircase. And then like she wasn't in that before, you know, or it's just weird shit. Like that it works in Bram Stoker's because it's kind of the whole thing has this really consistent warped kind of vibe to it, funhouse mirror kind of gothic romance to it. This doesn't. It's just like 1 second you're looking through that mirror and the next you're looking through someone's like, this is the Shakespearean version of Frankenstein. If the camera was falling asleep and we had to keep like doing things to wake it up. I don't know.
Well, I think the thing that you just said is probably the most important. Like Bram Stoker's Dracula is consistent. There's consistency, right, from start to finish. And this, like, half the movie is just people running around, like back and forth. Like all the extras are just running from one place to another, like shouting at something.
Yeah, the inexplicable like hanging of that lady. They just found her. Like they didn't explain any of that. Like really, like they just, it's like we're missing scenes, or like they just thought it would work. It's almost like Branagh just like went to each individual scene. It was like, what can I do to make this most theatrical, over the top thing that can jump off the screen in and of itself in isolation with no regard to the scenes that became, you know, they came before it or after it.
I mean, because all they really did to set that even up is the creation like puts that locket on her to frame her, but we don't know how he even knows to frame her. You know?
Yeah, and why would that have framed her? Just having a picture.
Because the boy had the locket in his hand and the boy died and they found the locket on her. I mean, but that's not enough to know why the monster would do it.
But the family would have had to tell them that she was not supposed to have the locket. The townspeople didn't know that shit.
Yeah.
Like, it doesn't make sense. Like, there's not, it's like, I don't even know if it was a plot hole. It's just lazy.
No, they just wanted to have a shocking moment, you know? Although, I mean, like that happened in the novel.
It's so easy to fix.
But unnecessary, you know, like they have this whole talk about a cholera outbreak, and it's really just people running around the town screaming cholera.
Well, they have someone on like a cholera pot or whatever, and it turns out it's amniotic fluid from a woman giving birth.
Yeah.
Right. But if you see something like the painted veil, you know that like how people are, you know, having to situate themselves with cholera, you know, and so it's just like, why would you mix that? It's like Kenneth Branagh doesn't know the difference. Like, it's weird.
He just wants a visual, you know, with history be damned. But I don't know. The thing is that it's not scary when it really could have been. He could have taken all these really striking visuals and made it like a very, very scary movie. And I don't know how you feel about the makeup involved with this particular Frankenstein. I think
I just was like, as soon as Helena Bonham Carter came out, I was like, somewhere Tim Burton just ejaculated.
Yeah, it's not. I don't think it's all that great. You know, I don't think that the Karloff version is that great either.
No, I mean, it didn't look. It looked more real than it looked good, right? Like they really went for like, this is an actual corpse, but like every little like nick and tick, he's gonna like put stitches in, like for any excuse, and it's just like, I don't know. At some point, you have to go for aesthetic. Like the old version of Bram Stoker Dracula in that movie, like he did not have to look like that. Like that was all done for theatrics, and it was just fun because it just fit.
But you know, though, that has stood the test of time and has entered pop culture where this has not. You know, like this version of Frankenstein's monster will never be the one that people think of first. So
okay, the only iconic design of Frankenstein is really for children at this point. With the bolts in the neck and the green skin and the flat top.
Yeah, it's Karloff all the way.
Yeah.
What did you rate Mary Shelley's Frankenstein?
3 stars because just it was all over the place when I rated it in scans. You know, like visually it's kind of like arresting, especially in that third act. The music was like meh. The acting is okay, like good, I guess, okay in parts, you know. And then like the story, I had to say like meh or not really great because like the pacing is so bad, you know, at some point, or just like inconsistent, you know, and it's not super important, you know. So it just kind of, all the great things about it and all the shitty things about it just kind of mixed together in just like a 3-star for me.
And I would agree. I also gave it 3 stars, which is rare for us to rate it the same. But I feel like the only reason that I gave this movie that amount of stars is because I had a good time while I was watching it, but not for the right reasons. And I feel like it's just a missed opportunity to.
Do you think we set each other up to make fun of a movie? Like it will not survive us watching a film together if there's any room for. Serious critique.
Yeah, probably. That's fine. That's how I like life. But like the thing is that Mary Shelley's Frankenstein is an amazing novel. Like watching this movie really made me want to go back and reread it because I haven't in a very long time. And then I was just like, such a fucking missed opportunity on everyone's part to make just a really good version of that novel. Yeah. And I hope to God that someone does someday. In fact, Guillermo del Toro may have his chance when we all get to see it very soon.
God, and then fucking, I don't know. I could talk about this movie all day and maybe that's the point. You know, I don't know.
I mean, for good or for ill. Finally, and maybe most importantly in this conversation, who's the hottest guy in Frankenstein?
I think it's Aidan Quinn, the captain.
Aidan Quinn is dreamy.
Oh, Captain by Captain.
You may not like this answer, but no matter what I think about the man, I think that Kenneth Branagh is really fucking hot.
Tom Hulce?
No, Tom Hulce, I just want to he's like your little brother. You know what I mean? But Kenneth Branagh's hot.
I just want to hug him and squeeze him.
But he's like the hottest Shakespearean actor of all time.
He kind of Jim Bunnied himself.
Yeah, he's got the rockin' bod in this movie, and but he's still doing his best British literature thing. I don't know. I think that Kenneth Branagh is attractive. He still is today. I think he's a good looking man. So he's my choice.
Well, so be it.
I'm captain, you're captain. Do you have some fun facts for me?
I do.
Okay.
So Branagh's portrayal of Victor Frankenstein featured an unusual number of dramatic, glistening, shirtless scenes.
Thank you, Kenneth.
Especially during the creation sequence. So, rumor has it, he was hitting the gym hard for that classic sweaty science aesthetic. Critics and the fans alike have joked about how much of the film plays like a gothic romance novel cover.
Yep, it really does. But I'm here for that.
He's got that shirt all the way down to where it's tucked into the pants, open, He's got he doesn't have the abs, right? But he's very fit.
He's super fit. He doesn't have the abs, but he kind of has that little V thing that happens around the pelvis.
Oh, you know what I mean? What do they call it in Rick and Morty? Cum gutters.
Cum gutters. Right around the top of the pantaloons, And so I'm fucking here for it.
I do love that pantaloon line. Anyway, Emma Thompson, who was married to Branagh at the time, was originally considered for the role of Elizabeth, but it ultimately went to Helena Bonham Carter. And Branagh and Thompson would divorce soon after, and Carter later with Tim Burton. So there was gothic drama on screen and off, and we did a little bit more research after this, and turns out it's very likely and almost very much confirmed that Kenneth Branagh had an affair with Miss Helena Bonham Carter, sister wife employee. Helena Bonham Carter. And that is the reason why Emma Thompson divorced him.
And how dare he?
But apparently there was multiple cheatings on sets with him. And so...
Are you surprised, though? I mean, I don't want to sit here and talk about someone's
I thought he was gay. I thought it was gay as Christmas.
No, I don't think so.
Apparently not.
He's a really straight Shakespearean actor going around fucking all the women's, but... I love me some Emma Thompson. I love me some Helena Bonham Carter as well, though. But Emma Thompson, though, is just I don't know, it's one of my favorite British actresses.
So speaking of Helena Bonham Carter, during the climactic burning mansion scene, Helena Bonham Carter's wig actually caught fire.
Oh, shit.
Fortunately, crew members extinguished it before she was hurt, but it was real method acting meets Final Destination moment.
Holy fuck.
Branagh originally shot a darker, more violent version of the film like that scene, and even more body horror and disturbing scenes, but the studio feared an NC-17 rating and forced several cuts, especially to the reanimation sequences and Elizabeth's grotesque resurrection. So I am wondering where that director's cut is.
Oh my God, we want to see it. Branagh.
Yeah, it could be someone give us a goddamn re-edit of this movie.
Branagh, do yourself a kindness and release your version, sir. Maybe we've been too harsh on Branagh in this conversation, maybe, everyone is pointing fingers, right? Which we already talked about, But
I would Branagh's famously quiet about every controversy in his life, whether it be about work or private life. And I would love for him to speak up about this, because I don't know what that set was like if Francis Ford Coppola is, rethinking, you know, his relationship to Branagh, wishing he was directing the thing the whole time. It would be a nightmare, because the next and final fun fact is that Coppola produced this film, of course. And, you know, this is fresh off the success of Bram Stoker's Dracula, but he and Branagh clashed during production, and particularly over the film's tone and the over-the-top theatrics. Coppola reportedly called the final cut, quote, a series of terrible decisions. And so, you know, that's too many cooks.
Yeah.
This does feel like Branagh and Coppola, you know, like I said, is very inconsistent. Half of it, and not even a clean half. It was like filmed out of order, probably like any other film, but it's like two different directors and their ideas just mashed together in different ways. In a bad Frankenstein-y kind of way, actually.
Well, and it could be a producer setting the director up for failure. I mean, like...
Yeah.
I don't know. I think you're right. Too many cooks. And I think ultimately, and I think these fun facts were very fun, by the way, but they all point to this. Like, this movie could have been, and maybe would have been, like, better than it was, you know, what we've seen today. This was your first time to watch it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I saw this movie in 1994 in the theater when it came out. I had not seen it since until...
You were like, what,
yesterday.
14?
Yeah, 14 years old when this came out.
Wow. Okay. This movie, for my final fun fact, this movie was the beginning and end of Flammable Merkins.
Well, I think that just about wraps up our conversation on Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. As always, we would like to know what you think about this movie and our conversation about it. You can find us on social media at The Film Flamers, on Facebook, on Instagram, on Blue Sky, on Threads, on all the places.
You can email us at tiredqueens@filmflamers.com or call our hotline at 972-666-7733. Call our hotline and Helena Bonham Carter.
Oh, sister wife, I'll set your neck in a blaze.
Sister wife employee.
Sister wife employee. It's a fucking HR nightmare is what that is.
My God, the nepotism.
As we've been alluding to, we have more Frankenstein to talk about this month for Pride Month, and we are going straight to the gay source of James Whale and talking about his campy, queer-coded Bride of Frankenstein and something related on Patreon.
That's right. I forget what we're going to do.
There's been
talk. That was going to poll, yeah.
Yeah, so some other things. Either way, head over to patreon.com/thefilmflamers. Join the family over there. Help us perhaps choose our Pride Month episode. And join the family and the conversations. There's a whole drinking game, y'all. Specificity.
Well, I need to go dream about father doctors and sister wife employee patients.
And have some sweet dreams. Sister wife employee
patient.
Corpse.
That Bonham Carter has ceased to be.
That is an ex. There's an ex Helena.